There is a specific pathway that we all use to enter our experience of this world. And it's very visible if you watch a child. A child first cries when it's born, and then it learns to communicate, whether it uses its emotions to do so, but it learns to communicate. And only then does it become a physically independent being and be able to physically interact with the world consciously. So a child doesn't pop out the womb and start walking around and then start talking and then start emoting. So the pathway of awareness is from emotional to mental to physical. And we in the world honor this pathway of awareness, but we do so unconsciously. And it can be seen in what we can call a 7-year cycle. A 7-year cycle that we honor unconsciously as a modern society, and that one could think of as indigenous communities long time ago honored consciously as points of rites of passage. So the 7-year cycle begins with the first 7 years of our life, in which we're called children. And in this state, we're emotional beings. That is our primary way of interacting with the world, is through emotion. And then at around the age of 7 years old, we go to school, and our focus becomes a mental focus, where primarily we're learning how to read, write, speak properly, the mental communication tools of the world. And then around another 7 years passes, and at around 14 years old, before we started drinking all the hormones in the milk, now it's about 12 or 11 years old, but around 14 years old, we would go through what was called puberty, in which there'd be the sudden physical activation in our being, and we become suddenly physically aware of the world and start thinking about a girl that we like or a boy that we like, physical things we like to do, and start thinking about what the physical activities we are going to do in the world when we grow up. And that 7-year cycle goes on until we're 21, and then we have our 21st birthday because we've now arrived. So there again we see a pathway moving from emotional to mental to physical. Now, a while back in indigenous communities, they would punctuate those points by rites of passage. At around 7 years old, there would be a rite of passage for a little child to start becoming a boy and a girl. And some communities would give a name at the birth of the child and then give a name at 7 years old, a different name, because they would know that around 7 there was a change happening. And then they would give another name around 14, and there'd be another rite of passage. Maybe then, for example, the young boys would be taken out with the men, and for kind of out in the wild experience, where the men would then dress up in weird costumes at night while the boys were sleeping and come and terrify them. And then at around 21, maybe those men, same men, would be taken out into the wild and left alone to do what may be a vision quest or something, so that they could get their vision on life and think about why they were here and what they were going to do in the community. And through those points they would be given different names, because it was acknowledged that they would go through different changes. The same would happen for women. But we don't have those today, so we do just about all that unconsciously. So usually when we get into our 14 years on in our teenage years, we will go and tattoo and pierce ourselves. We've got to do something to mark some change. And when we get to our 21st birthday, we'll have our 21st and get blind drunk and go crazy to mark the change. So we're still following these rites of passage unconsciously. That's the way it is. Awareness moves, our consciousness moves, and if we choose not to be conscious about what's happening, what's going to happen is going to happen, but just unconsciously. Another example of that is we were walking through a desert in Arizona, and we came across this area in the middle of nowhere, and there was just broken glass and graffiti on the rocks. And the friend who I was walking with said, must be a sacred place. I said, what do you mean? He said, no, it must be sacred. The people get here, they can feel the energy is sacred, they don't know what to do, so they just get drunk and break beer bottles. They're trying to acknowledge that this means something, because no one gave them the rites of passage. So the pathway of awareness actually begins for us in the womb, and it begins at what we can call a vibrational level. Around about 2 months into the pregnancy, when the vehicle has been prepared to a certain extent, our awareness, or we can call it our consciousness, enters that vehicle. and we begin a 7-month experience in which while we are in the womb, we are vibrationally imprinted through the experience of our mother. And this vibrational imprinting takes place according to our mother's heartbeat, the way our mother is breathing, the way our mother is moving, the way our mother is speaking. All of these imprint us. So whatever our mother is going through will be reflected in her body and will be imprinted on us vibrationally. Then, in the first 7 years of our life, we begin what we can think of as emotional imprinting. And imprinting is the same as tattooing. The experience is the tattoo gun. The tattoo that we're going to imprint is a destiny we have chosen for ourselves in this life, what we are come here to work with. And the tattoo, in this case, is imprinted energetically on our emotional body. Whatever experiences we have in the first 7 years of our life create an energy pattern within us. So, for example, all we really want in the first 7 years of our life is to be loved. That's really all that matters. If we really get that, everything else is fine. So we're open to that. And whatever experience that we receive in being open to love will then become our definition of love. It doesn't matter whether that love is actually love or whether it's abuse. And the experience of the first 7 years of our life leaves a pattern, or you could say a charge or a resonance or a tattoo in the emotional body that we equate with, say, what love is. So what we'll do when we enter our adult years or start having loving relationships in the world, we may, for example, believe that love is wine and roses as an adult. And so we may enter a loving relationship with wine and roses. But if, for example, when we were young and opened ourselves to love from our parents and were instead abused, that's the charge that we will associate with love. That's the energetic emotional charge. And therefore, we may begin our relationship with wine and roses, but very soon this will not work for us because it won't give us the charge that we unconsciously associate with love. And so we will, one way or another, manifest a scenario in which we begin to abuse or are abused so that we can at least feel something related to what we think love is. So that's how imprinting works. And there's many levels of imprinting. So the first 7 years of our life we can think of as the causal point of our experiences. The emotional body is the causal point of our experiences. So let's have a look at an example of this, how this works. If at the age of 6 years old, my parents separate and I experience abandonment. And abandonment, aside from becoming my unconditional definition of love, will be imprinted into my emotional body as a pattern. What will happen is that about 7 years later, that pattern will repeat. But now it will repeat because I've now entered the mental part of my experience. It will now repeat again a completely different circumstance. For example, at the age of 13, my best friend may suddenly leave the neighborhood and I will feel abandoned. Now it's a completely different physical circumstance. This time, when I was 6 years old, it would have been an emotional experience for me that I wouldn't have actually been able to conceptualize or put a name to because I hadn't developed those concepts yet. But now, at the age of 13, when I have that experience, it won't so much be an experience that's emotionally in my awareness. Because I'm in the mental place of learning language and words and concepts, what I'll do is I'll interact with that experience by telling myself something about myself and about my world because of that experience that I've had. So it'll be a more mental experience in which I will develop belief systems. Then another 7 years will pass, and that same, because it's an energy pattern that's been imprinted in my emotional body that is now going to repeat every 7 years, at around the age of 20, I may find that I'm engaged to marry someone that I really love. And the day before the wedding, she splits. And now it's no longer an emotional experience, although I'm having one. It's no longer a mental concept going through my head, although it's going to confirm my belief systems that I've developed when I was 13. But now it's going to be really a physical circumstance. How could she leave me on the day of my wedding? It's all about what's physically happening and the circumstances happening to me. It's identically the same experience, repeating. I'm just interacting with it physically now. I'm not even identifying it as the emotional event that happened when I was 6. So by the time we enter adulthood, our attention is transfixed on the physical world to the point that we actually believe that the physical circumstances we are having and the physical world we are in is the causal point of our experiences. And the way we behave and the way the world teaches us to behave and the example set for us is like this. If I'm holding a pen in my hand and I throw it over there, the world tells me that if I want to change the way that I'm throwing that pen, I must come over here and move it around. In other words, if I don't like my job, then I must get another job. If I don't like my relationship, I must get another partner. But we all know that the very thing that caused me to not like my job, even if I move to the other side of the planet and get a job in an occupation I have never done before, amongst people I have never met, within 3 months, the very situation that drove me from the last job will surface into my awareness and I won't like my job again. And the reason for that is we cannot change anything by fiddling with an effect. It's called ineffectual behavior. Where I'm holding the pen in my hand is the emotional body. As the pen flies through the air is the mental body, and where it lies on the floor is the physical body. These are my physical circumstances. These are the thoughts and belief systems, and this is the emotional pattern that I'm carrying from childhood. So in this world, as we are right now, the quality of our experience, which is the most important aspect to us, is the emotional content of our experience. And that is something we can change.